In the fall of 1971, a husband shoots his mother, his wife, and his 3 kids. He got hungry, made a sandwich, got in his car, drove to the bank, and vanished for nearly 2 decades. This is the case of John List, right now on Love and Murder. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Love and Murder, the weekly true crime podcast discussing relationships gone terribly wrong, where our motto is, you're either someone's last love or their first murder. I am your host, Kai, and in today's episode, we're talking about a case of egotism and murder. Be sure to subscribe to Love and Murder right now while you're listening so you don't miss a case. If you don't know, you can also subscribe on our Patreon so that you don't have to hear intros like this one or commercials. Actually, our last bonus episode over there was the beginning of the journal of a cannibal who documented his journey. www.patreon.com/Love and Murder. In the meantime, though, grab your butts, grab your apple juice, and let's get into some Love and Murder. Born around 1925 and raised in Bay City, Michigan, John was an only child of John Frederick List and Alma Barbara Florence. Right after he graduated high school in 1943, he enlisted in the Army and served under his MOS as a lab tech. At this time, World War II was going on, so he basically was serving during this time. In 1944, his father died, and 2 years later, he was discharged from the military. It seems like it was an honorable discharge, meaning basically he didn't do anything to be kicked out. After he left the military, he went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and got a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in accounting. In November 1950 was another war going on, the Korean War this time. John was recalled to active duty and PCS to Virginia. At Fort Eustis, Virginia, he met a woman named Helen Morris Taylor. Helen at the time was a widow and a single mother of a daughter named Brenda. She had been married to an officer who had been killed in action in Korea. A year after meeting, in December 1st, 1951, John and Helen got married in Baltimore, Maryland, and moved to California. John then went to work in the financing department for the Army. In 1952, after he left the Army again, he moved to Detroit, Michigan, and went to work at an accounting firm, then as an audit supervisor in Kalamazoo. It was here that John and Helen had 3 children. In 1959, he had been promoted to general supervisor in the company. In 1960, Brenda got married and went to move on her own. John got a new job with Xerox in Rochester, New York, and moved the rest of the family there. Eventually, he became a director of accounting services, and then in 1965, he accepted another promotion, this time as a VP at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey. Once again, him and his family moved. The life of a military person, basically. Even though he's not in the military, he's still leading that life where you move like... In the military, it's usually like every 3 years. But I don't know. This move was 5 years. 1960 to 1965, yeah. But he keeps moving. Everything seemed great. John was seemingly the epitome of successful family man with a prestigious job as an accountant. He provided for his wife, his mother, his 3 children, and they lived in a lavish New Jersey mansion in Westfield, New Jersey. Everyone lived in the same house. And by house, I mean 19 rooms, marble fireplace, a ballroom, and a Tiffany skylight, whatever that is. He came from a devout Lutheran background and followed in his father's footsteps as a Sunday school teacher. However, before Brenda had moved out, Helen had become an alcoholic and was slowly becoming worse. Then, John's seemingly perfect life began to unravel. In 1971, when he was just 46 years old, he lost his job at the bank. Despite his efforts, he struggled to get stable employment, and the weight of his financial crisis became increasingly unbearable. However, he couldn't bring himself to tell his family that he was unemployed. He felt ashamed, alone, and basically felt like a failure. Quote, I grew up with the idea that you should provide for your family, and to do that, you had to be a success in the job you had, or you're a failure, and that was not a good thing to be. End quote. Anyway, Helen would constantly compare John to her late husband by saying things like, if you were half the man my husband was, you wouldn't be having the troubles we're having. The strain on the relationship was unmistakable, giving John more of a reason to pretend that he hadn't lost his job. To cope with the situation, John developed a routine. He would spend his days at the train station pretending to go to work while secretly diverting funds from his mother's bank accounts to cover the mortgage. This act of embezzlement allowed him to keep up appearances, shielding his family from the impending financial ruin. He absolutely refused the idea of seeking welfare assistance, employing his principles of self-sufficiency and refusing to face the shame and humiliation it would bring upon his family. More than self-sufficiency, I think he was afraid of embarrassment. As the walls closed in on him, John found himself trapped in a devastating predicament. Consumed by his mounting financial troubles and the fear of societal judgment and a foreclosure letter that had just come in the mail, he believed he had reached a point of no return. So, instead of getting on welfare as a stepping stone in getting back his life, getting everything together while being able to take care of his family, John came up with another plan altogether. With calculating resolve, John meticulously planned the execution of his plan. Yes, he planned the execution of his plan. Hey, I can't come up with all the words. He went home and told his wife what was going on financially. They came up with a plan to sell the house and use the money for an apartment and expenses while waiting to get back on their feet. John went out and looked for a job, and so did his wife, and they lived happily ever after. The end. And that is the end of this episode. Yeah, that would be the logical and rational thing to do, but this is love and murder. Instead of using logic, John carried out his actual plan. He grabbed a 9mm Steyr 1912 semi-automatic handgun, which was a souvenir he'd actually bought from World War II. And as if that wasn't enough, he also grabbed his dad's Colt 22 revolver and got started. Quote, it's just like D-Day. You go in, there's no stopping after you start. He bought ammo and would go to the shooting range for target practice. After dinner one night, he asked his wife and sons that if they ever died before him, what would they want done with their bodies? Quote, I remember talking about funerals and cremation and burial. I thought I was being really clever. On November 9th, 1971, he saw his children off to school as he typically did and then turned his attention to Helen. In the kitchen, she was peacefully sipping her morning coffee. John approached her from behind, and without hesitation, he fired a single shot into the back of her head, killing her before she even realized what happened. Quote, I took a deep breath, walked into the kitchen with my hand on the cold grip of the Steyr, moved up behind my wife, pulled the pistol out and fired into the back of her head for instant effect. I stepped back as her disease-ravaged and now dead body slid silently, sort of in slow motion, to the floor. This is what he later wrote in his memoir. Quote, I approached all of them from behind so they wouldn't realize till the last minute what I was going to do to them. End quote. After this, he went to the third floor of the house where his elderly mother, Alma, was making toast. She greeted him with a kiss and they sat and had a seemingly ordinary conversation. She asked John about the loud noise that had disturbed her. John said he had no idea what she was talking about and then immediately shot his own mother in the face, ending her life without mercy. With his mother's body now added to the death toll, John continued with his plan. Returning to the lower level of the house, he dragged Helen's body into the ballroom and put it on a sleeping bag. He then went around and mopped up all the blood. Quote, I had to mop the floor 3 or 4 times because we had no mop wringer. I had to wring the accumulated blood out of the mop by hand. John then encountered his daughter Patricia, 16, when she was coming home from school. Without hesitation, he shot her as well, ending his daughter's life. When 13-year-old Frederick came home from school, he was the next victim. He then made himself a sandwich because, you gotta eat. Man, did you want him to starve to death? He went out and closed all of his bank accounts and then went to John Jr.'s soccer game and cheered him on. After the game, he told him how proud he was of him and drove him home. When he got home, he shot 15-year-old Junior in the chest. However, his gun misfired and Junior tried to defend himself, but it was in vain. John shot him multiple times, emptying both guns into him, and killed him. Quote, I don't know whether it was only because he was still jerking and I wanted to make sure that he didn't suffer, or that it was a sort of way of relieving tension after having completed what I felt was my assignment for the day. End quote. Did you hear this guy? This is how he thought about killing his family, an assignment for the day. And he shot his favorite son, with emptying both clips into his favorite son, saying, I didn't know if it was a sort of relieving the tension. Are you freaking kidding me? In the aftermath of the murders, John carefully arranged the bodies of his wife and children on sleeping bag in the mansion's ballroom. He didn't bring his mother down because, she was too heavy for him. He covered their faces and left a note for their pastor because he figured he would be the only one to understand why John did what he did. His note stated that he felt like this was the only way to stop his family from dealing with poverty and the evils of this world. Doing this would save them, he wrote. He then cleaned the entire house and cut himself out of every single picture in the house. He wrote and sent notes to the kids' schools and jobs stating that they were away helping an elderly grandmother in North Carolina for a few weeks, when actually this grandmother was supposed to come and visit, but she did in fact fall sick. If she had come, John said he would have killed her too. He then stopped the mail delivery, newspaper, and milk delivery. He turned the lights all on, turned on the radio, and went to sleep. He went to sleep, guys. The next morning, drove to the bank to withdraw his mother's savings, and disappeared from the lives of those who once knew him. Before we continue, I have a question. If he was supposedly saving his family from these horrors, why didn't he save himself too? Why was he the only one who got to live and watch these horrors going on? Guess we'll find out. Neighbors watched the house for a month. Now, you know what I mean. You know that you casually pay attention to your neighbors, and if you saw that they weren't coming or going, not seeing their children, and seeing the lights constantly on in the house, like never going out, every night it's on, 7 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, it's always on. You know you're going to think something's wrong. On December 7th, 1971, neighbors called 911 for a wellness check. So 2 days short of a full month, I think. So police got to the house. They knocked on the door, everything. Nobody answered. So they looked around and they decided they needed to open the door. When they opened the door, they heard organ music echoing throughout the house. Now, I can't lie, lambs. If I opened a mansion that had no activity for a month and the first thing I hear is organ music echoing through the house, like I'm out, like OUT, I'm gone. Sorry, I can't. I've seen too many horror movies. Anyway, these people who were braver than me apparently continued into the house. They realized the music was coming through the intercom system of the house, which is a fact they would have had to tell me down at the precinct because I'm telling you, I would have not been there. Next, they found a 5-page note from John explaining what they were going to find in the ballroom. And finally, they found the bodies, which by this time should have been badly decomposed, like I'm thinking. Now, which brings me to another question. Why, when they first opened the house, weren't they hit with the smell of decomposition? I wonder why. Police then went on a search for John. However, they were working with a lack of photos. They only had like old photos of him from other people, so they had no idea what he looked like now. They did find his car at the John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City, but they couldn't find anything else. No flight details, no bus details, no nothing. 9 months after the murders, in August of 1972, the mansion caught fire and was destroyed. The cause of the fire was officially ruled arson, but to this day, it remains an unsolved mystery, with no suspects identified. Along with the mansion, the legendary ballroom's exquisite stained glass skylight, rumored to be a priceless Tiffany original worth a staggering $100,000 at that time. That's 1972, so that's about $700,000 now, was also lost into flames. And then in 1974, somebody built a new house in its place. With each passing day, the trail for John List went colder and colder until there was literally nothing left. It just became a cold case. So not only did the case go cold, but for the next 18 years, John remained a fugitive. Although John had not been found in all of this time, that didn't mean investigators were not looking for him. They weren't going to let him get away with what he did. In 1989, some prosecutors in Jersey came up with a plan. They decided that they were going to get a bust made of John. So they hired a forensic artist named Frank Bender and asked him to make this bust, but make sure you age him as you think he would look after 18 years. Working with psychologists, Frank went about sculpting this bust. He gave John a hawk-like nose, bushy eyebrows, and he added glasses. The glasses were a touch from psychologists stating that he might wear these like he did when he was younger because it would remind him of his success back then. Now, if you look at the bust, and if you look at John, it's like the dude was looking at John while he was doing it. It is an exact replica. I have a picture of it in our Patreon if you want to see it. As anybody knows, in our Patreon, when we do a case, you get all the pictures, you get videos of the case, you get whatever comes with the case is what you're getting in our Patreon. Anyway, so after they did the bust, then they put it to use. On May 21st, 1989, America's Most Wanted aired a story of John List's murder, and 22 million people got to see the bust. After that episode, the tip line went crazy. Within 2 weeks, it was actually like 11 days, of airing the episode on June 1st, 1989, a tip came in from a woman in Richmond, Virginia, who said her next-door neighbor looked just like the bust in that episode. His name was Robert Clark. Coincidentally, he's also an accountant and an avid churchgoer. FBI investigators immediately went to the scene. It's go time! When they arrived, they knocked on his door and spoke to his wife. Dude, he got married again. She said they met at a church social gathering and he won her over with how nice and genuine he was. Yeah, nice and genuine, all right. So, was his name John List? Of course not. He was Robert Clark. John/Robert was arrested, but he said he didn't know who this John person was. I'm Robert. What are you talking about? Who's John? Yeah, maybe he looks like me, but that's not me. I've been here all my life, and I'm not a murderer. I would never kill anybody. I'm an accountant with a family. Investigators said, yeah, okay, get in the car, Robert, and took him down to the station. They then extradited him to Jersey, where he still kept up his story that he wasn't this John person. Why do you keep calling me John? I'm Robert. Robert Clark of Clark and Clark, who lives in Clarkety Clark. I'm Robert. Finally, after being shown irrefutable evidence, which included his damn fingerprints matching his fingerprints, meaning Robert's matched John's, on February 16, 1990, he confessed. Okay, you got me. I'm John, to which officers unsurprisingly just stared at him. So he basically kept up with this lie for 8 months. I mean, he really thought he was going to get away with it. He really thought people were that stupid. So here's the backstory. After he left the house in 1971 and ditched the car at the airport, he took a train from Jersey to Michigan and then decided to go to Colorado. In 1972, he settled down in Denver and worked as a cook at a Holiday Inn. He grew a mustache, wore different style clothing, basically more casual than his usual high-end clothing. continuously wore a cap, and that was basically it. It's not like he dyed his hair or grew it out or got a nose job or anything. Just facial hair and different clothes. Which, actually, from what I remember in watching this documentary, according to spies, that's enough to change your look because people don't really pay attention to detail that much, unless they're actually trained to. Shortly after, he started going by the name of Robert Peter Bob Clark. Now, this was the name he took from one of his college classmates who came out later and told reporters in no unequivocal terms, were me and John friends. I don't know that dude. He was just in my class. We never talked. No. And I just think it's so funny that he came out to let that be known. I know that dude. He just stole my name. I just thought that was funny. What press conference? I need to have a press conference here. Anyway, he got a job as an accountant under this new name. 7 years later, he moved on to another job as a comptroller at a job outside of Denver. He did this from 1979 to 1986. Now, I had to look this up. So, by the way, a comptroller, according to Wikipedia, is, quote, a comptroller, pronounced as either the same as a controller or a comptroller, is a management level position responsible for supervising the quality of accounting and financial reporting of an organization, end quote. So he still was in the accounting field. He started going back to church and ran the church carpool. One day he met a woman named Dolores Miller. In 1985, they were married. In the beginning of 1988, they moved to Virginia and he got a job as an accountant for a small firm. And he just lived out his life. Fast forward to now. Finally in prison, John told Dolores everything. He cried his way through the story, and a guard even overheard him telling her, quote, "I was always such a kind, gentle man except for this one act," end quote. That's what he said. I was a kind, gentle man except for this one act. Just this one act. I mean, Dolores just couldn't come to terms with the fact that this was the same man that she married. And she told the press, quote, "I love my husband very deeply. I cannot believe this is the same man." In 1990, John went to trial. His defense was that he suffered from PTSD from his time in the military during World War II and the Korean War. Wait, didn't he work in the financing department? What action did he see? Where did he get this PTSD from? Paper cuts? Seen a stapler for the first time? I'm really trying to understand this PTSD claim. Accountants out there, can you write in and let me know the horrors of your job? I stand with you and I thank you for your service. Anyway, psychologists came out and said, yeah, the reason is most likely that he was going through a midlife crisis. Damn, are you serious? If that's accurate, then he should have just gotten a car like every other person who goes through a midlife crisis. You could have just taken your new car and abandoned your family. Not that I'm saying that's right, but at least they would have been alive, you know? After this, John decided to testify. Because, if they hear from him, they'll feel for him. He said the real issue was his financial problems. It had reached a code red level and he couldn't figure out what to do. I mean, I can give you a hint. Don't kill your family. He said that he just didn't want his family to know that he was a failure. He told the story of how he would continue his daily routine. He said he was siphoning money from his mom's account to keep the house paid and told his kids to get a part-time job in the guise of them being responsible. But it was actually because he needed money. So why couldn't he continue getting part-time jobs? I know he was getting jobs, but he kept getting laid off. But why couldn't you just continue getting jobs? Anyway, he was also dealing with Helen's alcoholism and revealed that she had tertiary syphilis that wasn't being treated. Now, of course, you heard me pause on that word because I don't know what that is, so I had to look up with the CDC. And according to the CDC, tertiary syphilis is an STI that's a form of syphilis and affects the heart, memory, and leads to personality changes. It shows approximately 3 to 15 years after the initial infection. Damn! you could have gotten infected and 15 years later, you're like, wait, where did this come from? And suppose you were somebody else and you're just like, what did you give me? But it wasn't that person. Oh my God, that's so scary. It's treated by penicillin and is not infectious. Helen got it from her first husband and she didn't tell anyone for 18 years. Wow. He said, as a matter of fact, he didn't even want to marry Helen. She tricked him into believing she was pregnant. She then pressured him into marrying her in Maryland, which didn't require each party to get the premarital syphilis test, where almost all the other states required this test before marriage. Even though it kept affecting her health, she never told her doctors or John until her doctors did a full checkup of her in 1969 and this information was revealed. However, by then, she'd been riddled with the infection without treatment for a number of years, along with being an alcoholic, and John said this had, quote, transformed her from an attractive young woman to an unkempt and paranoid recluse, end quote. She also constantly compared him to her first husband, as I told you before, and he just couldn't take it. After the court made him see a psychiatrist, the doctor testified that John had OCD, and he came to the conclusion that he only had two solutions to his problem. He could either get on welfare and take care of his family, his kids, while he worked hard to rebuild his finances and worked his way off of welfare. However, this would teach his kids a valuable lesson that money is fleeting, and this is how you deal with times of hardship. We are family, we stick together, we love each other no matter what. Or his only other option was murder, kill his entire family. So he sat down and wrote a pros and cons list. The pros of welfare? The cons of welfare? Everyone's gonna know. Everyone would make fun of him. He would lose his power and the respect of the community. Murder, on the other hand, everyone wouldn't possibly lose respect for him then, right? I don't know what's going on in this guy's head. Anyway, Dr. Stephen Simring, one of the psychiatrists, said that John had a, quote, sense of neatness due to his compulsive personality. He also said that John showed, quote, no evidence of anything that approached genuine remorse. He's a cold, cold man. At sentencing, John said, quote, I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer, end quote. Basically, it's not my fault. Thanks, Obama. The judge said, quote, John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave. End quote. You get 5 life sentences, you piece of trash, to be served consecutively. If I could, I would literally come down here and hit you in the face with this gavel. Of course, I'm just saying that part. John issued a statement to the court that said he was sorry for, quote, the tragedy of what happened in 1971. That was it. That was it. Like, he didn't mention his kids, didn't say he was sad his kids were, like, that was it. Shortly after he was sentenced, John filed an appeal. His reason was that he didn't know what he was doing due to PTSD that he got from working in the financial department while he was in the military. Papers! So many papers! By the way, the other reason you can't convict him is because the letter he left behind was between him and his pastor. You know, pastor murder privilege. This should have been inadmissible as evidence, is what he said. I mean, what is our legal system coming to when a murderer can't leave a letter in full view of everyone and police don't read it because they know it's confidential? The federal appeals court said, rejected. Take your ass back to prison and shut up. In 2002, John did an interview with Connie Chung and he said, quote, I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since, end quote. So it only took 31 years for him to regret his actions and go on a nationally syndicated show to tell the world that he regrets his actions. Interesting. On March 21st, 2008, when he was 82 years old, he died in prison from pneumonia. The New Jersey Star-Ledger reported news of his death and called him, quote, the boogeyman of Westfield. In the same year, John Walsh from America's Most Wanted donated the bust to a forensic science exhibit in the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in D.C. The entire collection was later relocated to Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. In an interview with the residents of Westfield, parents told reporters that kids still don't walk past the area and no one wants to live on the same street as that house. And that is the case of John List, a selfish, narcissistic bastard who loved his image more than he loved his family. What do you think of this case? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and you have 3 ways of sharing them with me. You can, 1, tell me in the comments below. 2, you can join the Facebook group. It's free and welcoming group, as I always tell you, where you can discuss these cases with the rest of the lambs. Or 3, you can join the exclusive lamb community here at patreon.com/love and murder. Speaking of which, if you join Patreon at only $3 a month donation, you get commercial-free episodes. So like this episode minus all the commercials that were going on. Also, you don't get the intro. You just get directly into the case. You also get the additions of the case. So like with this case, I have a bunch of pictures. I have pictures of the house before the burn, when it was burned, after the burning. I have pictures of the crime scene. I have part of the note from John List, like all of that. You get all of that. So if you come on over, join at $3 a month, you'll get all of that as well. But the best tier is $5 a month and above, because not only do you get these things, but you also get bonus episodes and access to everything that I post throughout the web. You get it all here in this one little community, www.patreon.com/love and murder. Come on over. We'd love to have you. Before you go, don't forget to give me a 5-star review on whatever platform you're on. Last week, I told you to do the predictive text, I think 5 times. This time, I'm going to say, let's do it. Let's add 2 more. So let's hit that predictive text in the description 7 times. So hit 5-star review in the description. Just hit your predictive text 7 times and let's see what it says. Don't edit it. Just hit it and hit send. Whatever it says, it says. You can also download Good Pods and rate Love and Murder on there too, and find other indie podcasts just like Love and Murder. You doing this would help me out greatly, and it takes no time at all, so I'll thank you in advance. Follow me on social media. All the links are in the show notes below. And don't forget to share this episode. Share with your mom, your grandmother, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister, and your mother. And as always, I end each episode by reminding you that it's all love and no murder, y'all. Bye.